Some connections don't feel like they begin, they feel like they were already there, waiting to be noticed. A Scorpio man carries depth that few people ever reach. A Pisces woman moves through emotion like it's second nature. But when they find each other, it doesn't feel new. It feels familiar in a way that's hard to explain, like you've known this person longer than you should, like something in you recognizes something in them. He doesn't have to ask her to go deeper. She's already there. She doesn't have to force him to open. He already feels it. And that's what makes this connection different. It doesn't build slowly, it pulls you under. Scorpio man, Pisces woman. Let's talk about it. Chapter 1, the initial pull. This connection doesn't begin with questions, it begins with a feeling neither of them can fully name. A Scorpio man is used to sensing what's beneath people. He reads tone, energy, silence, what's said, and what's avoided. Most interactions feel predictable to him, even when they're emotional, but a Pisces woman doesn't move in predictable ways. There's a softness to her presence, but it isn't empty. It's layered, fluid. She doesn't present herself as something fixed, and because of that, he can't immediately define her, and that holds his attention. Not because she is distant, but because she feels open without being fully understood. At the same time, she feels him just as quickly, not through logic, but through recognition. Pisces doesn't need time to analyze depth. She feels it. A Scorpio man's intensity doesn't overwhelm her, it draws her in. There's something grounding about it, something that feels steady within the emotional current she naturally lives in. Where others might hesitate, she doesn't. She leans closer to it. What forms between them early on isn't curiosity, it's familiarity. Not the kind that comes from history, but the kind that feels like emotional memory, like they're meeting somewhere beneath the surface where words aren't necessary yet. Their interactions don't have to be overt to feel significant. A glance can linger, a quiet moment can carry weight. There's an unspoken awareness that something is already unfolding, and that's what makes the beginning feel different. It doesn't feel like something being built, it feels like something being uncovered, as if the connection was already there, waiting to be noticed. And once they both feel it, even subtly, it becomes difficult to return to a neutral state because the pull isn't coming from the surface. It's coming from somewhere deeper, somewhere neither of them fully controls. Chapter 2, Intensity Meets Surrender. The attraction between a Scorpio man and a Pisces woman doesn't move in straight lines, it drifts, it deepens, it surrounds. A Scorpio man is used to being the one who pulls others in. His presence is concentrated, intentional. When he's interested, it's felt, even when he says very little. But with a Pisces woman, something shifts. She doesn't resist his depth. She doesn't try to control the pace. She meets him in it. There's a kind of openness in her that feels disarming, not because she lacks depth, but because she doesn't guard it in the same way. Her emotions move freely, and instead of trying to understand them immediately, he finds himself experiencing them. That experience draws him closer because, for once, he doesn't feel like he has to unlock someone. The door is already slightly open. At the same time, she is pulled toward him in a way that feels grounding. A Scorpio man's intensity has weight to it, direction. His emotions don't drift, they focus. And for someone who naturally moves through feeling like water, that focus can feel stabilizing, like something she can lean into without losing herself. This is where the attraction becomes immersive. It's not built on tension alone, it's built on emotional access. Conversations slip into deeper territory without effort. Eye contact lingers, not out of intention, but because neither one feels the need to look away. Even silence feels full, like something is being exchanged without words. There's a sense of being understood without explanation, of being met without resistance. And that creates a kind of closeness that forms quickly, even if neither of them fully acknowledges it yet. But that's also where the intensity begins, because when emotional access is given this naturally, attachment doesn't take long to follow. And once that attachment forms, it doesn't stay on the surface. It pulls both of them deeper, being slowly consumed by the connection itself. Chapter 3, A Language Without Words. A Scorpio man doesn't connect halfway. When he lets someone in emotionally, he wants depth, honesty, something real enough that it can't be easily undone. He's not interested in surface level closeness. He wants to feel like he's reached the core of someone. And a Pisces woman doesn't resist that. She moves toward it. Where others might hesitate, she softens. She listens in a way that feels absorbing, not just attentive. When he reveals something, even subtly, she receives it without judgment, without needing to define it too quickly. That creates a kind of safety he doesn't often experience. He feels understood without having to explain every layer, accepted without having to translate himself. And because of that, he opens more, not all at once, but steadily. At the same time, something else begins to form between them, an unspoken language. The connection starts to feel telepathic. They sense each other without needing words. She can feel when something is off before he says it. He can tell when her emotions shift, even when she stays quiet. It's not something either of them plans, it just happens. Their emotional worlds begin to overlap. A look carries meaning, silence carries communication, presence alone feels like an exchange, and for both of them, this feels natural, not strange, not confusing, familiar. But this level of bonding is not light because when connection moves beyond words, it also becomes harder to separate. She begins to feel him as if he's part of her emotional space. He begins to feel responsible for protecting that space. And neither of them fully steps back to question how quickly it's happening because it doesn't feel like something that needs to be questioned. It feels like something that's meant to be experienced. And that's what makes this stage so powerful. It doesn't just bring them closer, it creates a bond that feels understood, even in silence. Chapter 4, Trust and Vulnerability. Trust between a Scorpio man and a Pisces woman doesn't always need to be forced. It unfolds naturally. A Scorpio man is careful with who he lets into his inner world. Not because he doesn't feel deeply, but because he does. For him, trust means allowing someone to see what's beneath the surface. And that's something he doesn't offer lightly. But with a Pisces woman, something softens. She doesn't push him to open. She doesn't demand explanations. She creates space. And in that space, he begins to trust her. Not all at once, but in quiet moments, in the way she listens, in the way she receives what he shares without judgment. There's a gentleness to her presence that makes vulnerability feel less like risk and more like relief. At the same time, she trusts him in a way that feels natural. Pisces doesn't approach connection with walls. When she feels something genuine, she leans into it. She allows herself to experience the depth without overanalyzing it. And that openness can feel reassuring to him because instead of resistance, he feels acceptance. Instead of distance, he feels emotional closeness. And that's where their trust begins to form, not through pressure, not through constant questioning. He begins to realize that she's safe to open up to. She begins to feel that she can stay present without holding herself back. And over time, that creates something steady, a kind of trust that doesn't need to be constantly proven because it's felt. He becomes more open, more protective, more emotionally present. She becomes more grounded, more secure, more deeply connected to the bond. And what forms between them isn't just vulnerability, it's emotional safety, the kind that allows both of them to be fully seen without feeling like they have to guard themselves in the process. Chapter 5: Physical and Romantic Chemistry. The physical connection between a Scorpio man and a Pisces woman doesn't feel separate from the emotional one. It feels like an extension of it. By the time they reach this point, there's already a sense of closeness that goes beyond surface attraction. It's not just about desire, it's about emotional presence. Being with each other doesn't feel external, it feels immersive. A Scorpio man approaches intimacy with focus, and a Pisces woman responds differently. She doesn't analyze the moment, she dissolves into it. There's a softness to the way she connects, a willingness to be present without holding back, without trying to control the experience. Where he concentrates, she flows. Where he directs, she receives. That contrast creates balance. He gives the connection structure, she gives it fluidity, and together it becomes something that feels almost dreamlike. Time feels less defined, boundaries feel less rigid. The experience carries an emotional tone that lingers even after the moment ends. This is not casual chemistry, it's absorbing. And because both attach through emotional experience, intimacy deepens the bond quickly. It reinforces everything they've already been feeling, the closeness, the familiarity, the sense that something meaningful is forming. Chapter 6: The Spiritual Connection. There's often a sense of familiarity with these two, like you've met before, like you already understand each other without needing time to build it. And then the signs start to appear in small, quiet moments. She might glance at a clock and see 1111, or notice 1001 on a license plate right after thinking about him. A song plays at the exact moment she's feeling something she can't explain. They reach out to each other at the same time without planning it. To her, these moments don't feel random. They feel like synchronicities, like something is aligning beneath the surface. There's a sense of intuitive pulls, being drawn toward each other without needing a reason, without needing to understand why. A Scorpio man may not immediately describe it in those terms, but he feels it too, just differently. He notices the timing, the intensity, the way the connection seems to move in patterns that don't feel coincidental. And that's what creates the pull. It's not just attraction, it's the feeling of, I can't explain it, but I feel it. An emotional and energetic alignment that doesn't need constant validation to exist. They don't always have to speak to feel connected. They don't always need clarity to feel the bond. It's just there. And for both of them, that creates a sense that the connection carries meaning, even if they never fully define it. That's why people often describe this pairing in a certain way: soulmates, twin flames. Chapter 7: Fantasy and Reality. This is where the connection becomes beautiful and complicated. A Pisces woman doesn't experience love in purely concrete terms. When she connects deeply, she feels the emotional potential of the relationship just as much as the reality of it. She doesn't just see what is, she feels what it could be. And that feeling can be powerful. She may begin to idealize the bond, to see it as something rare, almost otherworldly. The emotional depth, the unspoken understanding, the way he seems to meet her beneath the surface, it can feel like something destined. A Scorpio man feels the depth too, but he does not live in possibility. He lives in truth. He senses what's real beneath what's imagined. Where she may soften the edges of reality, he sharpens them. Where she may drift into what the connection could become, he becomes more aware of what it actually is. At first, this difference feels balancing. He grounds her, she softens him. but over time, it can create tension. If she leans too far into idealization, she may overlook things that matter, inconsistencies, emotional shifts, moments where the connection doesn't align with what she feels it should be. She holds on to the feeling even when reality starts to shift, and Scorpio notices that he may begin to question whether she's seeing him clearly, whether she's responding to who he is or who she feels he could be. At the same time, his intensity can disrupt her emotional flow when he pushes for truth, for clarity, for emotional honesty without distortion. It can feel heavy to her. Confronting reality directly isn't always where she feels most comfortable. She processes in layers, not always in straight lines, so the connection begins to split in two directions, one rooted in feeling, one rooted in truth. And for this bond to remain stable, both have to meet somewhere in the middle. She has to stay present in what is. He has to allow space for what is felt. Because if either one leans too far into their nature, the connection becomes unbalanced. Not because the feelings aren't real, but because they're no longer shared in the same way. Chapter 8, Emotional Depth and Sensitivity. When a Scorpio man and a Pisces woman fully settle into each other, the connection becomes less about words and more about feeling. Both are highly intuitive. A Scorpio man senses what's hidden. He reads beneath behavior, beneath tone, beneath silence. He doesn't need everything explained. In fact, he often prefers when it isn't. A Pisces woman moves through emotion in a similar way, but softer. She absorbs energy. She feels shifts before they're spoken. Where he detects, she receives. Where he analyzes, she intuits. Together, this creates a kind of emotional awareness that feels almost unspoken. They can sense each other's mood without asking. They can feel tension before it's acknowledged. They can understand something is wrong without needing details immediately. At its best, this feels like closeness on a level most people don't experience. There's comfort in not having to explain everything, in being felt without having to translate yourself. But this depth comes with weight, because when two people are this emotionally open, boundaries can begin to blur. A Scorpio man, when affected, feels deeply and intensely. If something shifts, he doesn't ignore it, he focuses on it, sometimes to the point where it consumes his attention. A Pisces woman, when affected, doesn't always separate her emotions from his. She absorbs what he feels, and over time, that can become overwhelming. His intensity can start to feel heavier than grounding. Her sensitivity can start to feel less like connection and more like emotional overload. Without clear boundaries, they can lose track of where one person ends and the other begins, and that's where confusion enters. Not because they don't understand each other, but because they understand each other too much. When balanced, this connection feels deeply empathetic, healing even, but when unbalanced, it becomes emotionally consuming. The key isn't reducing depth, it's learning how to hold it without losing themselves inside of it. Chapter 9, Why It Feels Fated. There's a point in this connection where it stops feeling like coincidence and starts feeling like something that was meant to happen. A Scorpio man doesn't attach easily. He can be selective, controlled, even distant at times, but when someone reaches him, truly reaches him, it leaves a mark, not just emotionally, but psychologically. He doesn't forget connections that change him. A Pisces woman experiences connection differently, but just as deeply. She doesn't always separate people from the feelings they create. When something touches her emotionally, it lingers. It weaves itself into her inner world, into her memories, her imagination, her sense of meaning. And when these two connect, the impact doesn't stay on the surface, it settles somewhere deeper. There's often a feeling that the connection is larger than the moment itself, that it carries meaning beyond what can be explained logically. Even if the relationship is short lived, the emotional imprint can feel long lasting. Part of this comes from how naturally they merge, the telepathic understanding, the emotional overlap, the sense of being seen without explanation. It creates an experience that feels rare, and anything that feels rare feels significant. But there's another layer to it. This connection doesn't just bring comfort, it brings transformation. A Scorpio man may find himself confronting emotions he usually keeps controlled. A Pisces woman may find herself pulled into emotional depth that feels more intense than what she's used to drifting through. They change each other, not always loudly, but internally. And that internal shift is what creates the feeling of fate because it doesn't feel random. It feels like something that altered your emotional landscape in a way that stays with you. Chapter 10: Who feels this connection the most? Not everyone experiences this connection at the same depth. For some, it feels meaningful, for others, it feels unforgettable. What determines the intensity isn't just being a Scorpio or a Pisces, it's how deeply this dynamic touches the emotional core of the chart. This connection becomes strongest when it activates the moon. The moon governs emotional safety, instinct, and attachment. When a Scorpio or Pisces energy reaches someone's moon, especially through conjunctions, trines, or oppositions, the bond moves beyond attraction and into something that feels personal, familiar, hard to detach from. This is where the connection starts to feel lived in. Venus and Neptune contacts intensify it even further. When Pisces energy touches Venus, love begins to feel unconditional, almost dreamlike. When Neptune is involved, the connection can take on a spiritual or surreal quality, beautiful, but sometimes difficult to fully define. This is where people begin to describe the bond as otherworldly or telepathic. Pluto adds another layer. When Scorpio's energy connects with Venus, the moon, or the ascendant, attachment deepens. The connection becomes harder to ignore, harder to release. There's a sense of emotional gravity, like something is pulling both people inward. House overlays matter just as much. When this connection activates the eighth house, emotional merging becomes unavoidable. When it touches the 12th house, the bond can feel spiritual, hidden, or difficult to fully understand, but deeply felt. These are the placements where the connection doesn't just happen, it imprints. People with strong water placements, Cancer, Scorpio, Pisces, tend to feel this pairing the most intensely, especially those who are already emotionally intuitive or sensitive. For them, this isn't just a relationship dynamic, it's an experience, one that lingers long after it's over. Because when this connection reaches the right parts of the chart, it doesn't feel casual, it feels consuming. And if you felt it at that level, you don't need it explained. You recognize it by how deeply it stayed with you. Closing. This is not a connection you explain easily, it's one you feel. A Scorpio man and a Pisces woman don't just meet on the surface, they meet somewhere deeper, somewhere unspoken, somewhere emotional, somewhere that doesn't always follow logic. And that's why it stays with you, because even if the connection doesn't last in a physical sense, the feeling of it does. You remember how it felt to be understood without explaining, to be felt without translating yourself, to exist in a space where words weren't always necessary. And that's not something you experience with everyone. So if you've experienced this connection or you're in it now, you already know. It's about how deeply it's felt and how naturally you find yourself staying in it.